नमस्कार विद्यार्थियों। लंबे समय से राजस्थान के अंदर इतिहास विषय में एक कमी महसूस हो रही थी इंग्लिश मीडियम स्टूडेंट को। तो मैंने अपनी तरफ से कोशिश करी है, बिल्कुल भी नहीं। हमारी जान पहचान के बाद मुझे इंग्लिश मीडियम के अंदर हिस्ट्री में राजस्थान के अंदर बेस्ट टीचर्स के अंदर तनय गोयल नज़र आए, जिन्होंने दिल्ली यूनिवर्सिटी की कॉलेजों में भी पढ़ने का कार्य किया। इनके अलावा ये एक बहुत अच्छे स्कॉलर और इतिहास विषय के अच्छे ज्ञाता है। तो राजस्थान के अंदर हिस्ट्री विषय के अंदर इंग्लिश मीडियम को लेकर जो वैक्यूम क्रिएट हो रहा है, मेरे हिसाब से तनय की क्लासेज के बाद वो वैक्यूम राजस्थान के अंदर एक तरीके से ख़त्म हो जाएगा। नॉर्मली मैं किसी टीचर को लॉन्च करूं, ये क्षमता मैं मेरे अंदर नहीं मानता, पर मेरी एक कोशिश रहती है कि मैं मंच के ऊपर किसी टीचर को लेके आऊं तो कम से कम मेरी नज़र के अंदर तो वो टीचर उत्तम होना चाहिए। तो तनय मेरी नज़र के अंदर पूरी तरह योग्य शिक्षक के रूप के अंदर नज़र आते हैं। बाकी आप फैसला करने वाले हो, स्टूडेंट कम्युनिटी। आज की क्लास के अंदर हमारे साथ मेरे छोटे अनुज नंद किशोर यादव जी भी पधारे हैं तनय को बधाई देने के लिए। तो मैं सर से रिक्वेस्ट करूंगा नंद किशोर जी से, सर आप पहले तो कुछ तनय को उपहार देना चाहते हैं वो दे दीजिए। उसके बाद सर भी आपको 2 मिनट के लिए संबोधित करेंगे और उसके बाद तनय आपके मौर्य साम्राज्य के ऊपर आपको कुछ नई बातें बताने की कोशिश करेंगे। प्लीज NK यादव सर।
नमस्कार विद्यार्थियों, जैसा कि भवानी सिंह जी सर ने बताया, हम तो इतिहास का सर्वज्ञ उन्हें मानते हैं। अंग्रेजी माध्यम के विद्यार्थियों के लिए एक विशेष कि तनय जो है इस फील्ड में आ रहा है। बहुत बहुत शुभकामनाएं तनय को, और आप लोगों की अपेक्षाओं पे खरा उतरे, आत्मविश्वास से पढ़ाए और कंपटीशन ओरिएंटेड पढ़ाए। तो मैं ज़्यादा समय लिए बिना आप लोगों के लिए तनय को इंट्रोड्यूस करता हूँ। बेस्ट ऑफ लक तनय। हिस्ट्री से लाभान्वित हो बच्चे इंग्लिश माध्यम के। धन्यवाद।
You're on. Good evening, everyone. So you've already been introduced to myself, so I will not take more time and talk about myself. Instead, I would like to begin with the topic, which is the Mauryan Empire, and I want to give you a very brief introduction to Mauryas, basically trying to introduce you to why we are supposed to study the Mauryas, and then we will proceed as to how we are supposed to proceed study the Mauryas. So, I mean, it's been a long journey of state formation, which is, we need to understand that from the Vedic period till about the middle of the first millennium BCE, it's 1000 years of human evolution and state evolution in which we have to understand the context of the Mauryas. The Mauryas, it's a study in state formation. Precisely. It's a study of state formation, because I am addressing you as you might be undergraduate students or you might be preparing for any competitive exams. But you are just out of your +2 classroom, and I am giving you a very brief of what and how we should understand the Mauryas. The context of the Mauryas, how and why it should be studied, is state formation. State formation is the context, because you see, from the Vedic period till about the middle of the first millennium BCE, with the formation of the Mahajanpadas and everything, I hope that you've studied all of that and you have got a brief background of all of that. It is a pastoral society that evolves into a state monarchy. People who have got no idea of what a territory is. Pastoral people have got no idea of what a territory is. They move from one place to another, right? And so in 1000 years, we understand that there is a state that has come up, that has got defined the territories in which people have to rule, people have to reside, people have to pay taxes, there is coinage. So we need to understand how this comes about. And that is precisely the significance of why we study the Mauryas. See, historiographically, from, let's say, the 1920s till about 2020s today, it's 100 years of studying the Mauryas. 100 years of how historians have started to look at the Mauryas since the beginning, with, let's say, people like KP Jaiswal, people like, let's say, H.C. Rai Chaudhary, people like, with 1950s, we've got R.S. Sharma, and then there's Thapar, and then there's a whole lot of perspectives from which we've started to look at the Mauryas. So earlier, we were looking at the Mauryan Empire. We are trying to understand that there is a state formation that is not just existing, in Magad. We've got dynasties, let's say the Hiranyaka dynasty, Bimbisar, Ajatshatru, then we move chronologically to Shishunags, and then we've got the Nandas, and then come the Mauryas. But the Mauryas are significant than the monarchical and Janpadat states that are ruling in this region of Magad. We all know the significance of Magad. Everybody has studied in their +2 classrooms whatever the significance of Magad is. Okay. We've got iron over here, we've got forests over here, we've got land that is easily cultivable. So there's going to be a rise of surplus. And with this surplus, we've got iron technology. It's also a culmination of understanding what the peak of iron technology can be. 1000 years of having iron, or let's say 500, 600 years of being able to use iron to manufacture tools and weapons. That is what we need to understand and place the context of the Mauryas. It's the culmination of iron technology, the surplus, and all of this. Because you see, earlier we were looking at just a state and we are trying to rule and we are trying to build up. See, because there was a nationalist perspective. In the 1920s, there was a nationalist perspective that we need to figure out that Indians were able to rule themselves and build an empire, right? But then we moved on from, let's say, just state formation and political studies, and now we are trying to look at art history in the Mauryas with sculptures. So we have proceeded from, in 100 years, we've proceeded from just political studies to art in the Mauryas. So it's a long leap of 100 years in historiography. With all of these, what these people have been able to do, we witness that, you know, and how should I explain this to you is with the context of, you know, with the context of our primary sources. The primary sources. So now, having understood why we try to study the Mauryas, the context is, you know, the culmination of iron technology, social change that has pertained to that. We see that there is this is the culmination of what an empire on an ideology of religion can be of the state. How a person becomes most important to a society that used to believe that there is no collective property. With Vedic nomadism, we know that there is no collective property. There is no individual private property. To an emperor who is to be ruling over the entirety of mass from, let's say, Afghanistan to Gujarat to Karnataka to Odisha to Bengal. One state becoming so dominant, and we've got a territorial control of this one singular emperor. So we need to understand that this context of study is to be interlinked with how an empire works with in context of all of these places. How a person from one place, from one capital, which might be Rajgriha and then later Patliputra, is able to rule over all of these regions, right? So this is a regional study. We have to understand the context of all of these things. So then we come to the question of why and how we should study the Mauryas. So how we should study the Mauryas is basically through these primary sources. And what is the major primary source to study the Mauryas? To study the Mauryas, the major primary source is the first major primary source to study the Mauryas is the Arthashastra. Everybody might be familiar with the terminology of why it is called Arthashastra, because you see it in one of the few chapters. In the very first chapter, the author, the text is attributed to Chanakya, Kautilya, and basically there's a debate as to who this person was, when this person lived. But we need to understand that the most important thing about Arthashastra is its content and the context in which it is found. So firstly, the manuscript of Arthashastra came about in 1904. It was discovered, it was a palm leaf manuscript, it was found in South India. And from this, we started to believe that there is a complex state that was existing in about, let's say, the 4th century BCE, which is the time period of the Mauryas, the 4th century BCE, from 322 till about 300 years after that, 250 years after that, which is the period of the Mauryas. So this is beginning of this particular time period. 3rd century, 4th century BC. The basic study of the Arthashastra, the manuscript in the beginning used to be like this. There was an empire 2000 years ago in India. So that was where the historiography started to believe that now we can study an empire in India, because they were looking for empires in India. Reason being, there were empires found in Mesopotamia, there was empire found in Egypt, and there was an empire in Rome. So the historians of India, they were like, why would we not have such an empirical study? So this is where we begin looking at the Mauryas in this particular perspective. That is the first significance of the finding of the manuscript of the Arthashastra. But there are multiple problems with the source. Because I'm expecting that you're all undergraduate students and possibly preparing for any competitive exam or anything, but you need to also understand that there are significant problems with the primary source that we are dealing with. First of all, the Arthashastra does not mention the Mauryas or Chandragupta or Ashok or anyone in general. So how can we attribute such a text to the study of the Mauryan Empire? That's a major problem with the text. If the text does not mention the empire that it is going to be talking about, how do we corroborate the text with the particular sources, with the particular context? The answer lies in how we approach the text, and this is where, for you as undergraduate students, methodology is something that you need to understand. The methodology of approaching such texts is the context in which it is found, A, and other references of this particular text. You see, Arthashastra is mentioned by multiple other manuscripts that are after this particular period. Say, for example, if Arthashastra is attributed to, let's say, 3rd or 2nd century BCE, or the study of the period of 3rd or the 2nd century BCE, there are multiple texts, let's say, and I will name them for you, which is firstly Nitisar, which is by Kamandak. Kamandak's Nitisar, then there is Dandin's Dashkumar Charitra, then there is Vishak Datta's Mudra Rakshasa, and then there's Bahan Bhatta's Kadambari. All of these texts are after the Arthashastra, because all of these texts, they mention the presence of Arthashastra, they mention the presence of a person named Chanakya, they mention the presence of certain people who might have attributed to certain chapters of the Arthashastra. So let's so that is how we date that, because these texts, the later texts, let's say Vishak Datta's Mudra Rakshasa, yes, Vishak Datta's Mudra Rakshasa or Kamandak's Nitisar, all of these texts which are a later text, which are later texts than the Arthashastra, are mentioning the presence of Arthashastra in this particular time period, or let's say even if not the particular time period, they are mentioning the presence of a person named Chanakya. So we can say that this text predated these texts. All right, and there are also few texts that, because there are certain contents of the Arthashastra that do not match with, let's say, what we find in the Kama Sutra of Vatsayan. All right, so if the content of these texts, or let's also talk about the Manusmriti. Why not talk about the Manusmriti? The ideas that are mentioned in all of these texts, they are ideas that are later than the Arthashastra. So we can chronologically place this text in a period predating them, because we know the dating of these texts. They are mentioned in the colophon of these texts. I hope you understand what a colophon is, a colophon. A colophon is what you find in the beginning of a book. The first page is the front page, and then you turn a few pages, and then there's a column which mentions this text was printed in this particular area. I'm sure you must have read a lot of books that have that first page. We usually skip to the table of contents and then we start reading. Your undergraduate students, I expect you to read a lot, because unless you are able to read, you won't be able to write. Although your preparation demands you to talk about just MCQ questions or something of that sort, but in order to be able to understand these things, because if you are to pursue a master's later than this particular time period, you need to be able to write those things that you are studying. And these become important part of your study as an undergraduate student. So I expect you to read, if not the whole of these texts, certain parts of these texts. Because other teachers, and I have seen a few people teach these things and something of that sort. The problem is that students are never familiarized with what is written in these primary sources. They never read even a single page of something that they study for an entire topic. See, the difference of understanding a text through historians or through your teacher, and then going on and differentiating it with reading the primary source itself, is that when you read the primary source itself, it stays with you. It's like a story that stays in your head. Everybody in their childhood must have read a story of, let's say, Premchand's Eidgah. Everybody remembers that story because you read that story. But if somebody must not have just given you the context of that story or explained it to you, that this was the context of the story, this is what happens in the story, this, that, blah, blah, blah. The problem is that it will not stay with you. So I expect you to read at least certain parts of these primary sources. And the problem is that people don't read it, even though these are easily available online. I mean, the text, which is Arthashastra, is been translated in multiple languages. And I mean, Patrick Olivelle, the latest work, which something that I have read personally, it lists around the entirety of compilation of all the manuscripts and all the historiography on the text. And then he has given this fat book on Arthashastra. This fat book, and I don't expect you to read the entire book, 600 pages long. No, just read 50 pages. Just look at the table of contents, memorize the table of contents, and look at what the author has done in that particular thing. With the Arthashastra, the structure of the text, it's got 15 chapters. It's got 15, what do you call it? Adhikaranas. "15 adhikaranas with 10 adhyayas each. So that makes 150 chapters in the Arthashastra. 150 chapters in the Arthashastra with 180 prabandhas. So that means Chanakya, or the person who has written the Arthashastra, is dealing with 180 topics distributed over 150 chapters in 15 adhikaranas. So usually I've seen a particular questions in, let's say, JRF, and I've seen a particular questions in RPSC paper also, of what does the first adhikarana, or let's say the sixth adhikarana of Arthashastra talk about. This has been questions. So you don't read the whole Arthashastra. You just look at the table of contents of Arthashastra. When you look at the table of content of Arthashastra, you know that this is what each adhikarana is going to talk about. All right. And you just memorize that. Table of content is what? 2 pages. You don't have to read anything else. Just read those 2 pages. All right. And you know what Chanakya, or let's say the Arthashastra, is going to talk about. Now, in that context, what I also want to tell you is this. The Arthashastra is largely a prescriptive text, which is the problem with the primary source, because we are dealing with the primary source and we are dealing with the Mauryas, so we need to deal with the primary source itself. All right. The Arthashastra gives what an empire should look like. It does not exactly say that this is what the Mauryan Empire looked like. The Arthashastra says this is what the Mauryan Empire which might happen, because there is a very peculiar case. We don't know of the origins of Chandragupta Maurya. The first mention of Chandragupta Maurya is possibly in 321, or let's say 331. 331 is important. Why? Because 331 BCE is the year when Alexander comes to India. He invades. All right. So there is a reference by Justin, who is a Greek scholar. All right. Greek literature is also, I would say, a primary source talking about, Greek literature is also talking about the Mauryan Empire, but I was talking about 331. So Justin mentions humble origins of Chandragupta Maurya, who might have been around when the war that was happening at Hedispas. Right. Hedispas is where? Hedispas is in Punjab. We know the battle of Hedispas took place between Rabi and Chenab. In between that Doab, that is where the battle takes place. So there is a mention by Justin that there was a person named, not named, but a tribe of peacock rearers. You know what? Peacock is more. From more becomes Maurya. So that is what Justin, or let's say the Greek writers or the Greek tradition would try to say for Chandragupta Maurya, peacock rearers. Peacock rearers. All right. So he might have been belonging to a tribe or a clan, because you see, this is where it's coming from. We were talking about state formation. In the period before the Mauryan Empire, we study clans and study of lineage to state. A lineage society to a state society we are coming about. So Justin also gives the origin of the Mauryan Empire as a clan that emerges into a dynasty later on. So a clan of peacock rearers who become Maurya later on was possibly what Justin attributes, or the Greek literature attributes, for Chandragupta Maurya, who is running around in Punjab later on, who finds a treasure in Madhya Pradesh, Satpura range, and from that treasure he is able to buy an army of mercenaries. And that army, and Chandragupta Maurya is met with Chanakya, who was, you know, possibly insulted by Mahapadmananda at some point of time. And then Chanakya flees and basically runs away, because Chanakya was from Takshashila. Chanakya is even beyond this particular region. Chanakya is possibly over here sometime, because when he studies in Takshashila, he comes all the way to Magad for services, but he's snubbed away. He goes back. He's like, I'm going to have revenge. And when he has revenge, he finds this particular person named Chandragupta Maurya somewhere in the Satpuras. All right, this person has got an army. This person is of humble origins. Why not support this person's claim and tell him that I have written this particular text of statecraft, and we are going to employ all of these ideas and build an empire. So this is a very sweet narrative that sounds of how the Mauryan Empire must have come into being. But we can obviously problematize this further. And there's no limit to problematizing the primary source, because this is a story that sounds true, might not be true, but that is not basically our purpose of understanding. Our purpose of understanding is that the Greeks mention the Mauryas. The Greeks are in constant touch with the Mauryas. The Greeks mention the origin of these particular people. So we know that an empire is not built without having contacts outside the particular region. Right. With that, let us talk about another important source to study the Mauryas, which are, as you all might have seen and read and whatnot, something that looks like this, and then there's, you know, a lion capital over here, an elephant, whatever it might look like. Like the pillars of Ashoka and the rock edicts of Ashoka. Right. Ashoka and his edicts, they become the second most important source to study the Mauryas, because with this we can approach the study of an empire from an archaeological perspective. There are two types of primary sources: textual sources, archaeological sources, then there are coins and all of that. But the most important are usually, for historians, are considered textual sources. There's a saying that if you want to talk about the Rig Vedic period, you should either be a philologist or you should either be an archaeologist, because there is no other way to talk about Vedic religion if you don't know the philology behind the Vedas. Philology is something that we should understand if we are talking about textual sources, and archaeology is something that we should understand if we are talking about, you know, things like inscriptions, things like coins, things like, I don't know, rock edicts. So philology is what? if you do know, philology is the study of the origin of the language. We go from this is the study of linguistics. It's basically beyond linguistics. We go into the original terminology of, you know, how the text was composed, the content and the context of the language, both of them together. Without that, we cannot study the primary source itself. Because you see, let's say, I'm just taking a brief detour in order to make it clear to you, is that Rig, or let's say Ramayana, the latest, or let's say like the earliest manuscript of Ramayana that we have been able to find is basically from 1000 CE. And it was found in Nepal, right? There are other versions of Ramayana that are being found later on. But does that mean that Ramayana took place in 1000 CE? No. We have to decode the kind of language, or let's say the terms that are used in this particular time period, in order to understand that this is a later thing. And then go back to what the content of the Ramayana is talking about, and then relate it with archaeology. Because archaeologically, the Ramayana probably took place around, because what Basham dates it to, let's say 2000 BC, certain other people date it to 1000 BC. So that's a debate. When exactly did the Ramayana take place? Or did it even happen in the first place? But that's not the question. The question is what the content of that thing is and how we study a particular manuscript. Because I was talking about philology. We have to go back to what the basis of that manuscript is, in order to study what is happening earlier on. So coming back to the Ashokan edicts, the language of the Ashokan edicts is Brahmi. The script is Brahmi. The language is Prakrit. And in the northwestern frontier, the language of the Ashokan, the script of the Ashokan edicts is Kharoshthi. So Brahmi is, Kharoshthi is written from right to left, Brahmi is written from left to right. So these are basic things that you might know and you can find in very, like, you know, basic textbooks. But the thing about Ashokan edicts and all of this that we are able to, we need to decode is basically, this represents not just, let's say, missionary activities of Ashoka, because he might be talking about Dhamma at particular time. I think you all must have heard about this thing, Dhamma, Ashoka and his Dhamma. Ashoka is talking about Dhamma, good conduct with servants, good conduct with Brahmins, respect to the Brahmins and the Shramanas who are coming to you, the Dharma Mahamatras and all of that. What I want to tell you is that it is not just missionary activity of Ashoka that we find in the Dhamma. Dhamma is specifically an imperial policy that is imposed by Ashoka from the frontiers of the empire. Right? All across the frontiers of the empire, we see that he is writing stuff in all of these edicts. Right? We've got 14 major edicts that are found in 10 different places. All right. 10 different places. We find these edicts that are written, and all of these edicts, they talk about, you know, different things, but mostly, and I would like to read, let's say, one major rock edict with you. The first major rock edict of Ashoka we can read, because this is right exactly from the primary source itself. You can find it in, if you need a translation of this particular thing, let's say all the major rock edicts and the minor rock edicts of Ashoka, just go to the text by Romila Thapar, which is Ashoka and the Decline of the Mauryas, and just read the appendix of that text. The appendix, 14 pages, all the edicts of Ashoka are transcribed in English. You can read it and you can learn from the language. You can read everything about it. And this becomes the primary source of us to study of what the imperial ideology of the Mauryan Empire was, or what it was becoming, or what it represents. So let's just have a little exercise and read the first major rock edict of Ashoka. It goes, and it's a translation in English. The beloved of the gods. The beloved of the gods basically is the epithet that is used by Ashoka in all of his inscriptions. Beloved of the gods, although is not the first time when a person is using this particular epithet. Chandragupta Maurya also uses this epithet and other kings before him. So let's just briefly read the first major rock edict. It goes, the beloved of the gods, Piyadasi the king, has had this inscription on Dhamma engraved. Here, no living thing having been killed is to be sacrificed, nor is the holding of a festival permitted. For the beloved of the gods, the king Piyadasi sees much evil in festivals. Now, why am I highlighting parts of this particular thing is because several times the examiner is going to ask you, what does the first major rock edict talk about? There's going to be a match the following from, let's say, it's going to be written major rock edict 6th, 7th, 8th, and then you have to match it with, let's say, animal killing, renouncing of the world, Dhamma, and all of this. So if you have read that particular rock edict, it's easier for you to memorize it, what it says. All right. So in the first thing, he's saying no living thing having been killed, and he's saying evil in festivals. What does that indicate? It indicates from his imperial policy that he is inching towards less of animal sacrifice, and he's also inching towards stopping of all the rituals and festivals that might be prevalent in the society. And this is where we can understand from this primary source that we are understanding an empire that is talking about, rise of Buddhism, because Buddhism does not talk about rituals. Buddhism is basically about, understanding the ideology of the Buddha. It's about the Sangha and all of this, but it is not about festivals, and it is not about, let's say, ritualistic practices. And Ashoka is writing over here is that he sees much evil in festivals and rituals, though there are some of which the beloved of the god, the king Piyadasi, approves. But he's also saying that I approve some of them. All right. So this is where we understand from this primary source of empire studies is that empire exists with multiple people existing in the domain of the emperor. All right. Multiplicity of religions that are existing in the domain of the empire. This is what an empire becomes. That is why it is different from, let's say, a monarchy or a small janpada. That is why we study Mauryas specifically as an empire, because this is where it is becoming. We are moving beyond just, let's say, a particular region or, let's say, a clan or a lineage, and we are going towards, empire formation, and we are inhabiting different people in our domain. So he is saying that there are certain others that he approves. And then he says, formerly in the kitchens of the beloved of the gods, the king Piyadasi, many hundreds of thousands of living animals were killed daily for meat. But now, at the time of writing this inscription on Dhamma, only 3 animals are killed, 2 peacocks and a deer, and the deer not invariably. Even these 3 animals will not be killed in the future. We have moved beyond just not understanding empire into environmental studies these days. And with this primary source, we can understand which animals were important in that particular time period, because there are tribes in regions who rear animals, hunt animals, and all of this. Because you see, these rock edicts are found in multiple these rock edicts are found in different regions, and different people will need different messages. All right. So with this, we see that he's inching towards less of animal sacrifice, prohibition of killing of animals in his own kitchen, and stuff like that. And he is giving hints to other people who are present in his territorial empire that this is something that I abide by, and you can feel safe in my empire. All right. So this is something that we need to understand from our primary sources, is that you will see that all of these major rock edicts, you can find that they are written in these in a major big huge rock, and they are inscribed on this. And let's say if it's going to be a pillar, they're going to be inscribed on that, and they represent the ideology of the empire through which we can study what the empire was becoming or what the empire represents. All right. I don't want to burden you with a lot of information and lot of processes that we need to study from all of this. But so that's why I would like to conclude with what we have done so far. Basically, we need to understand the context of the study of the Mauryas in the context of state formation into an empire, or let's say empirical state formation. Why not call it empirical state formation? And for the study of such empirical state formation in, let's say, after, or let's say 3rd to 2nd century BCE, we refer to two major primary sources that we have talked about today, which is the Arthashastra and the edicts of Ashoka. Now, this is the context of studying the Mauryan Empire. This is the content through which we study the Mauryan Empire. And you can find these easily available in multiple readings, in multiple texts, because this has been, translated by Olivelle, who's written an entire corpus on Arthashastra. I think that is enough. Just read the table of contents. Just read, let's say, the first 1, 2, 3 chapters, because they talk about, the internal administration, and let's say a couple of more chapters, whichever chapters that you like, because once you read the table of contents, you understand the entirety of what the text is going to be talking about. And then whenever you read the text, you understand certain contents and certain things that are important. Then you can read the edicts, which are easily available in Thapar, Ashoka and the Decline of the Mauryas. If you just Google, you can find it, Decline of the Mauryas. And just read the appendix of it, and you will be able to read all the edicts. If you just do this, you will know almost 70 to 80% of whatever there is to understand about the Mauryas. Because once you understand imperial formation and all the ideas that I've given you about imperial formation, and then you go ahead and read these things, which is basically 25 to 30 pages, you will understand 70 to 80% of what is there to understand about the Mauryas. With that note, I would like to conclude the first lecture on the Mauryas. You can easily connect with me through my email, or let's say anything. I will put that down in the description of this video. And that is how I would like to conclude the first lecture. Thank you so much for listening. You have been a wonderful audience.